Hi, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show a fun little slow stitching project. It's just something that you can add to your existing projects, or you can make it the center point, the focal point of your work. Or you can add it just to the side or a piece of your work. It's a wonky stitched block. So it's stripes that you stitch using the same basic stitch, a straight stitch, and you vary the length of the stitches. And because you're doing them in such a format, it looks like stripes, but they're a little off, a little wonky, and it makes a really fun piece. Now this is how I do that. So here is an example of our wonky line art to use in slow stitching, and I think it's really effective. Now this one is done on a little piece of white fabric with a backing, and you can see the back of my stitches here. And I just alternated the colors of different blues and purples, and it's very effective. You can create any shape. I just did a square here. Today we'll do a rectangle. And it's really just a fun way to do it by repeating the stitch, and it's the same stitch, just in different colors and different sizes. So to start with, I'm going to take my heat-soluble marker. It's a Frixion pen that you can find in the office supply section. This one happens to be felt tip, but there's also ballpoint. And I write on my fabric, do my stitching, and then when I'm done, I can just take a hot iron and it removes any traces of the ink. So what I like to do is I just create my shape. Now you can create any shape you want. I'm just going to do a rectangle here, just like this. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. That's the beauty of the wonky shape. You can do a rounded shape just as easily, or any shape. From here, I want to divide into my sections. Now you can go up and down, you can go diagonal or across. I'm just going to go across, but feel free to make this as unique as you like. So what I like to do is just create lines going from one side to the other, and I kind of have different shapes going on as well. Now I know I have 5 colors of floss that I want to use, so I want to have 5 shapes here that I'm going to fill in. Here I have my initial design, and I think it weighs heavily here, so I just want to create this, maybe change this ever so slightly, and then I'm pretty happy with that. I'll set aside my marker because I don't need it anymore, and I don't even have to worry about any of these lines. I just got to remember which lines I want to keep. So from here, I'll take my first color thread, and it's going to be the red. I'll start up top because I just kind of like that rainbow effect. I have it on a needle where I knotted the end, and I'm just going to make a straight stitch. Now in our sample here, I have a little space, almost like a line in itself, where there's no stitching, and I really like that effect, so I'm going to try and recreate that here. I'm going to start right at the top, at the corner here, and I'll just keep playing until I get my needle in the right position. So I'll start at the top line for all my stitches for this row. And then I just bring them down, and I'm going to just bring them just shy of this ink line here. And then I'm going to try and keep all my stitches approximately that length, meaning that distance from this line here. So my next one, I'm going to start at the bottom here, and I can choose the distance between spacing for these vertical lines. And I just pull it gently and go straight up. And I'll just continue this all the way along. But I'll speed this along so you can see all the stitches that I make. And then you can see that on the back, it makes little stitches on the bottom and the top of the row that I'm stitching. If the stitches are slightly off, they're not perfectly parallel, that's okay. I mean, I am trying to make them parallel, but sometimes that doesn't work out. The one thing that I just want to make sure is that the top of my stitches always go to the same position. If it doesn't, it looks a little wonky, and again, that adds a little more character to my piece, but I'm still striving to make that happen. Now you can make as many rows as you want. You can use any color or type of thread. Variegated thread would be lovely for this technique. I want to create somewhat of a rainbow, so that's why I'm using these colors. And they're all very vibrant colors. They're just off the primary colors, so that makes it a little fun as well. Now what makes this a little wonky and a little fun is that the stitches and the stripes aren't perfect stripes. They are parallel to each other, but each row is a very unusual shape. And it's almost as if every time I do this, I'd get a different result. I just round my stripes and just continue with the row beneath it being parallel to that. And that's a very effective and interesting result. Now I'm choosing a rainbow color to use for my thread, starting with the reddish colors, but you can use colors to make a sunset, or colors to make a landscape, or your favorite colors, or even just black and white. That would be very effective as well. Now over here I skipped a little space, so I'll just go back and throw in a stitch. So there I have my first row of stitches. I could always go back and fill in any spaces that I want, but I'm pretty happy with that. I'm not looking to achieve perfection or even a satin stitch that fills it all in, so I'm quite happy. The back looks just like that, and now I'll just knot off my thread by creating a stitch and looping it on itself. So now, just in examining what I've done here, I have that little gap up here, but I came a little close on the end. It doesn't change the overall look of that row, but for my next row, I want to keep that gap. So I'll just go in there with my pen and create my other row. And I'm going to just try and stitch between here and here. And I'll create a little gap here, just so I have a target for the bottom of my stitches. Then I'll take my orange thread and do the same procedure. I like to start at the top, right in that corner, so all my stitches on that side will match. Pull it somewhat snug, and then come down here. Now I'm not using an embroidery hoop. I like to just hold the fabric taut with my fingers. You can use an embroidery hoop if you like, and your fabric is large enough to be stretched through it. I just like the convenience of a small little piece to work on that I can take with me. It's small enough I can stick it in a small little bag, put it in my purse, and while I'm waiting for a doctor's appointment or sitting in the car waiting to pick somebody up, I have something to occupy my time. Now I really like how these two colors look side by side. Trying to keep all my stitches vertical. This one was a little bit tilted, and that's okay. That's part of the wonky stripe. I just don't want my lines to cross. So I can go back in there and fill any spot that has a little hole or too much of a space between stitches. Now I'm using 6-strand embroidery floss, which is nice and thick. I happen to love that texture, but you can divide the embroidery floss, or you can use smaller, thinner thread. Use what you're comfortable with. When you use the products that you really like the feel of and the texture and the colors, you get a really great result. Now I'll finish up this final stitch right at the end. Don't want to pull my stitches too snug. Then I have my stitches, I can flip it over and knot it off. And I'm ready to start my next color. So now for my yellow, I'm just going to bring this up just a little bit so that I have a nice marker. This just helps me to create that space. You don't need to do that if you don't want to. I just like the way that looks. And again, I'll start my new row. Part of the beauty of this is that the stitches, while they all go in the same direction, are different lengths. And so that's very interesting on the eye. Now with this row, I'm kind of automatically spacing them a little further apart than the rows above. If I don't like that, I can go back in and fill it in, but I kind of like that effect. It makes it very interesting. Sometimes unexpected things really stand out And so your eye is trying to make sense. Your eye and your mind are trying to make sense of what you're seeing. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Now, if there are any stitches you don't like, you could always go back and remove them and just start again. So far, I haven't come up to the point where there's anything that I feel needs to be removed, but that might happen yet. And then add my final stitches. So there I have my 3 rows and the back of my project. So now for my row of green, I want to bring up this base just a little bit. And once again, I'll start my row. The start and the finish of this row have very short stitches. Then it bellows out in the center and then returns to its small size. So now I'm making these stitches quite far apart. I don't think that's going to work for me, but I'm going to continue making the stitches, and then I could come back in the opposite direction and fill them in. As I go across with my stitches, my thread gets a little twisted. So I just like to gently unwind it, and that will help prevent any snarls or knots that occur. So if you wanted that kind of a skeleton effect with that large space between your stitches, you can just continue like that. But I really want to fill it in. So I'll finish that row, and then I'm just going to come back and fill in that space between stitches. Now there's no saying you have to make the rows even. You can have some stitches that are closely spaced together and others that are not. I just happen to like this look. And if I run out of thread, I'll just thread my needle again and finish up those few stitches that remain. The larger stitches use up a lot more thread than the smaller ones. But I only have a couple more stitches here, and I think it'll work on this needle. And I'll fill one more in over here. So I'm almost complete with my rainbow of wonky stitches. I'll flip it over on the back and knot my piece. And now for the last row of color that I want to add to my block, I'll start with this beautiful blue color and pull those stitches. Again, if I create too much of a space, I can just go in there and fill the stitch right away, or I can come back like I did on the previous row and fill them all in together. So this project is best done when they are not rushing, you're not trying to finish a row quickly. You just want to create these beautiful stitches, nicely spaced. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect to come out really effectively. You don't want to work, this is just a really good project to work on your stitch tension. Now, as my needle threads with each stitch, it twists, so I'm just going to untwist it, keep it loose, and then continue. Create that final stitch, and then knot it on the back. So now with a hot iron, I just want to press out any of that marker that remains. And the iron, the heat of the iron, take it right off. So there I have my wonky striped block. So that's how I make my wonky stitched block. You can change your block and make it any shape you want, any closed shape that is, circle or oval, square, rectangle. Even organic shapes are kind of fun because you fill them up with these stripes. And by leaving a little space between each stripe, you get that appearance. And it's a fun texture to add to your work. It's also kind of a simple stitch, very soothing to create. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.